Hey guys, it's Viejo here, and it is the beginning of the third week of April in 2024. Time's flying. We had a rainy weekend here on the central coast of California. Things are clearing up now, so it's all good. Hey, I've been out here at the bench working on loading some ammo for 38 Special, perhaps to be shot out of my Cimarron Pistolero here. And these happen to be cast bullets from a Hensley & Gibbs number 290 mold. And I decided that, hey, I should be checking these and I should get out my case gauge. And I go, no, you don't want a case gauge. You want the cartridge gauge. And I thought, I'm constantly interchanging those terms, and there's pistol gauge, cartridge gauge, case length gauge, ammo checker, with a what's what are the differences. And I thought, well, this is a good time to talk about that a little bit. And I'm going to kind of focus on the L.E. Wilson gauges because I got a whole bunch of them that I use frequently, mostly what they call a pistol gauge. And today we're just going to be talking about handgun gauges. Okay, we'll save the rifle gauges for another time, but we'll look at some revolver and some semi-auto stuff here. Okay, Lyman calls this thing an ammo checker, and it works a little bit differently than how L.E. Wilson runs theirs. Here's a case length gauge from Lyman, and all it does is measure the length of the case, tells you if it's too long or too short. Okay, and then L.E. Wilson has what's called a case length gauge that kind of does the same thing as this, although with a little more finesse, I think. And they also have a pistol gauge, okay, that's written right on it, says pistol gauge, which is a cartridge gauge, measures or checks the dimensions of your completed cartridge. Let's come in here a little closer and take a look at these. So let's first look and see what's written on here, okay? Again, L.E. Wilson, okay, 45 auto, pistol gauge. Whereas this one, again, L.E. Wilson, 45 auto, case length gauge, all right? And if I take a fired case, this one's dirty, fired, okay, it has been deprimed, but it hasn't been sized, and it will fit in there no problem, okay? If I try to put this guy into the pistol gauge, though, it won't go, all right? But that's not what this gauge is for, okay? This gauge is for a completed cartridge. What the case length gauge does, and again, there we are, case length gauge, okay, is this is designed to tell us if the case is too long or too short, okay? And for our semi-auto rounds that head space off the case mouth, we got to do this checking on a nice flat surface, a piece of glass, or in this case, a nice smooth piece of aluminum, because they'll go right through there, okay? And that doesn't tell us much. But if we look up here, we've got a maximum and minimum gauge on there. And the idea is that if the case sticks up above the high side of that, then your case is too long, and if it's below the low side, then your case is too short. Okay, so it tells us if the length of the cage falls within SAAMI maximum and minimum for that particular case, right? And we can go look those up and see what those dimensions are. Of course, you can also get your calipers out, okay, and just measure that case and see where it falls. Okay, it's a little faster to do it with the case gauge, though, case length gauge, and that will tell you, and you can do the finger swipe across there and tell if the edge of the case is sticking up above the minimum side, the trough. Let's get this up out of there. Okay, come on. I don't know. Can you kind of see that there's a trough in there, okay? And there's a dimensional difference between the high side and the middle of that, which would be the low side. Okay, so that's how that things work. You just kind of fit it over the case, and you can take a look. You can rub your finger on there. You can bring this whole, shooting match up to eye level and look at it. To me, this one is just, that case mouth is just below the minimum, or maybe right at it. Okay, so it's getting kind of short. Probably still serviceable though. All right, and again, you can do that. This case has been sized, it's clean, it fits in there just fine, and I'll try to keep this together so you can see up there. And we are maybe just above the minimum size there, but we are below the max. All right, so we're within spec on that case. And again, the pistol gauge does something different. It will help us tell whether this case has been sized or not, because an unsized case is not going in there. Okay, I might be able to pound it in there, but I'd have to turn around and run something in there to pound it out. Okay, so if you're in that situation where I got cases, man, I don't remember if I sized these or not. Are they sized? Oh yeah, it goes into my pistol gauge just fine. So that case has been sized. You don't know whether it's too long or not, okay, or too short, but you know that it's been sized if it fits in there. Okay, so the L.E. Wilson pistol gauge, sometimes also called a cartridge gauge, okay, and sometimes called a max cartridge gauge, will tell us if this round, this completed round, that's really what this is for. It's not about the individual cases. It's about the completed round. It tells us whether or not that round exceeds the SAAMI maximum case or cartridge dimensions for length. In other words, if the nose of that bullet stuck out beyond the length of that rim there, then that cartridge is too long and may not even go into your magazine, let alone seat properly in your chamber. So this tells us about the overall cartridge length and the width dimension of that cartridge. Okay, and L.E. Wilson's gauges for their pistol gauges are based on SAAMI max cartridge, not minimum chamber. Let's take a look at the differences on one of my pages from SAAMI. Stand by. Okay, here we are in my load records book. This is where I record all of my reloading data. Okay, every round that I load gets recorded in here. And at the beginning of each caliber section, this is my 45 ACP section, I have a page that I printed out from SAAMI. SAAMI, S-A-A-M-I, is the Small Arms and Ammunition Manufacturers Institute. Used to be government, now it's privately operated. And they set all the standards for ammo and firearms so that anybody who comes along and says, hey, I want to make 9mm ammunition or 45 ACP ammo or 38 357 revolver, that ammunition is going to fit in a firearm, okay, no matter who made the firearm or who made the ammo. So we have these specifications that are laid out. So here we go for 45 auto. And if I kind of come down in here a little bit closer, okay, notice that it says maximum cartridge and minimum chamber. So up here we have the cartridge dimensions, and then down here are our chamber dimensions. Let's take a look at this dimension right here, okay? That is the diameter of a 45 ACP case, okay, just above the head here, okay? 0.4760. We come down here, okay, kind of follow this line straight down to the chamber drawing. Okay, at that same point in the chamber, we have a larger dimension, 0.4796. So this number is a little bigger than that number. That tells us that a SAAMI minimum chamber is a slightly larger dimension than the maximum cartridge. So that means the biggest allowed cartridge diameter should fit in the smallest allowed chamber, okay? Because the smallest allowed chamber is a little bit bigger than the biggest cartridge ought to be, all right? And of course, there are other dimensions here that are set by SAAMI. For example, on this 45 case, here's the dimension just right below the case mouth, 0.4732. And if we go down at the same spot, okay, on the chamber, 0.4744. So again, a little bit larger in the chamber allowed compared to the cartridge dimension there. And our pistol gauges or cartridge gauges, we're going to check all these dimensions for us, even on something like the tapered case and a 9mm. And so SAAMI is kind of saying, hey, we're giving you guys a little bit of leeway here. You know, we're allowing the cartridge dimension to be a little bit different from the chamber dimension, but don't be making a chamber any tighter than that, because we want, you know, Company B's ammo to fit in Company A's chamber. So don't be cutting them any tighter than this, and you guys that are making ammo, don't make it any bigger than that. Okay, for all these dimensions, right? All right, here are a couple of cartridges. Okay, cast at the same time, sized the same way, loaded at the same time. Okay, but we got, you know, cartridges that came, these are range cartridges, they both happen to be Winchester cartridges. But let's check these in our pistol gauge. Okay, and remember, the case length gauge doesn't do anything for us, okay, on this one. Okay, I mean, the cartridge is going to go right through there. It doesn't, that's not what we want. We don't want the case length gauge. So if I put that guy down in there, see that? It sticks up just a little bit. It's not quite kosher there. I can push it in there, but it won't fall out. I got to kind of give it a little nudge to come out of there. And whereas this one goes right in and falls right out. So this particular case is right at about the maximum SAAMI dimension for a 45 ACP cartridge. Okay, and by maximum, they mean that's as big as it should be in order to fit in a SAAMI minimum chamber. Okay, if it's any bigger than that, okay, it's not going to fit in a chamber that is right at SAAMI minimum. And your firearms chamber may or may not be there. Okay, it's not likely to be smaller than SAAMI minimum, okay, and probably is a little bit bigger. Let's test that with this barrel. Okay, this is the barrel from the firearm that those two cartridges are going to be fired from. Okay, and we all know about our plunk test, right? Plunk, in and out burger, right? No sweat. Whoops. This is the one that was marginal in my pistol gauge. And lo and behold, it does fit there. So this fitment here, okay, which was marginal, I had to kind of push it in there, told me that this case, this cartridge rather, see, I keep interchanging those and I shouldn't do that. This cartridge is right at the biggest dimension that it should be to fit in a chamber that is at SAAMI minimum. Well, it fits fine in here, so this chamber is a little bit bigger than SAAMI minimum. It goes in and out of there just fine. And that's partly why we have said all along that these guys, these pistol gauges, can be a useful tool, but the best gauge is going to be that from the firearm that the rounds are intended for. Let's go kind of go through this again, but with a revolver cartridge. Okay, so here again, for the revolvers, I've got a 38 special pistol gauge, and I have a 38 special case length gauge. Okay, we just stick this in here, and the 38 special head spaces on the rim, so you don't have to do these over a flat surface. You can just hold it in there with your finger, but the concept is the same. We look down through there, and we've got a maximum and minimum case length. Okay. If the case mouth is below that center trough, then our case is too short. At least it's below SAAMI minimum. Doesn't mean you can't use it. And if it is above the higher dimension there, then it may need to be trimmed. All right. So that's the case length gauge. And that is a sized case, and that went in there just fine. Here is a fired case that has not been sized, and it goes in there just fine. Okay. All right, so now let's go look at the pistol gauge and just use it with an empty case first. A sized case goes in there and fits, okay? And so that, well, it's a little oily, so it doesn't want to come out. Where's my high-tech 38 special removing tool? There we go, okay? So that guy, even though it's been sized, it's close to be in the dimension that we want it to be. Okay, that one was a little better. How about a unsized case? Will it go in there? No. And I'm pushing pretty good on that. It's not going to go in there. Here's another one. Let's see if that one will go in there. No, no way. Okay. So once again, our pistol gauge can be a useful tool to answering the question, hey, I don't remember if I sized these. Are these sized or not? Oh, it goes in there. Okay. Very easily. Okay. And the unsized cases, there's no way they're going in there. So there's a handy use for that, okay, even though we all should know that these are sized or not, okay, because we've kept them separated and stored properly, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes the question comes up, oh, I got a handy set of gauges right over here. I pull the right one off, give it a quick check. Don't have to go take the revolver apart and bring it out here to check. And this is my 38 special section. And if you look here, this is for 38 special, maximum cartridge, minimum chamber. Here's our cartridge specs. And if you notice the maximum dimension of the cartridge down here near the base, 0.379. And if we come down here to the chamber dimension, that would be in the cylinder of your revolver. It's a little bit bigger than that, 0.3089. Okay. So we're at 379 to 3809. So quite a bit of difference. This guy is roomier than the maximum dimension of our cartridge. And we are also given here a maximum overall length, that's this dimension here, of 1.275 inches. Cartridge longer than that, the nose of the bullet may protrude from the end of the cylinder with a potential of locking your cylinder up when you rotate it. Okay, so case length gauge, it's only about seeing if our cases are in spec for length dimension. Okay, that's it. Nothing to do with the cartridge itself. All right, and again, you know, you can put a cartridge in there, but that doesn't have much meaning to you. All right, so here's one of these cartridges that I just loaded up, and that seems to go in there pretty well, and it pops right back out. So that cartridge is at or slightly below the maximum dimension for a 38 special cartridge, meaning that it should fit in any chamber that is at SAAMI minimum chamber spec or larger. Okay, how about length? Okay. Again, you can see we got lots of room in this one. We can make a cartridge considerably longer than that. If the nose sticks out through here, though, then that cartridge is too long for a 38 special cylinder, and it may hang up your cylinder upon rotation. Okay, but this one's got lots of room in there. Okay, but okay, that one does not want to quite go all the way down in there. It doesn't drop out quite as easily. I can push on it, and it's going to be, it doesn't want to go all the way in there. Okay. So I got to kind of poke that out. Let's try this just for grins in the Lyman case, which is cut to a different set of standards. No problem, okay? Well, since the L.E. Wilson pistol gauges are cut to SAAMI maximum cartridge, the fact that this doesn't quite want to fit tells me that there is some dimension on that cartridge that is a little bit bigger than the maximum that SAAMI says you should have in order to fit into a SAAMI minimum chamber. So we can do kind of like what we did with the 45 ACP. Let's bring in the chamber for the firearm that we intend to use these for. Here's the one that fit the gauge just fine. In she goes, even bounced a little bit. Out she comes. How about this one that was a snug fit? In she goes, right back out. Okay, so these chambers are a little bit larger than SAAMI minimum chamber dimensions. Large enough so that they can accept this cartridge that is slightly too big, according to SAAMI's standards. So once again, we see that, the best judge as to whether this cartridge is good, here we were, didn't quite want to fit. Should we take that cartridge and tear it down and not use it? Well, no, because we can check it in the firearm for which it's intended, and it goes in there just fine. Why? Because these chambers are bigger than SAAMI minimum. Remember, a SAAMI max cartridge gauge tells us that if it fits in here, it should fit in any chamber that is at least SAAMI minimum. Okay, and if your chamber's a little bit bigger than that, then that's fine. It's going to go in there also. But if it doesn't fit here, there is some dimension on that cartridge that it's a little bit too big. Okay, and I'm thinking this one might be right at the case mouth, but I don't know that for sure. Okay, but if it's a little bit too big for one reason or the other, then it may or may not go into your firearms chamber, and that's when you should double check. Okay, so you're at the bench and you're loading, and you check all of your cartridges as is a good idea to do, and you come up with one or two that are like that. Do you toss them? No, it just tells you that there's some dimension that's a little bit off. Is it off so much that it's unusable? Well, bring in the expert. Okay, that one it snugs itself right down in there and doesn't want to leave. Okay, so there's our differences between a pistol gauge and a case length gauge. Okay, case length gauge is only about, is that case too long or too short? That's all that's for. The pistol gauge, which is a cartridge gauge, tells us whether or not this entire cartridge falls within SAAMI spec, and it's also a good one to test on whether our cases have been sized or not. Okay. All right, there you go. The difference between a pistol or cartridge gauge and a case length gauge, and also the idea that this Lyman gauge, I think they call theirs an ammo checker now that I think about it. Okay, this gauge is considerably more forgiving than the L.E. Wilson. Okay, these dimensions are bigger, and just because it goes in here doesn't mean it necessarily is going to fit in your firearm either. Okay, so if you're using one of these, and just because it goes in there doesn't mean it's going to fit your barrel or your cylinder. Okay? So these guys are good at the bench as a quick check. If there's a question, if there's a debate, bring in the judge. All right, there we go. And you've heard me in the past and will hear me in the future, I'm sure. I'm talking about getting my case gauge out to check a completed cartridge, and that's not what I mean to say. I mean to say get out the cartridge gauge. And again, in the case of L.E. Wilson, they call that a pistol gauge. So we're only talking about handgun checkers here at this point. So the rifles are a little slightly different, but they work on the same function. And again, these are at SAAMI maximum cartridge dimensions. So if it fits in here, it will fit in a chamber that is as small as a SAAMI minimum chamber. This is the biggest size that can fit in a SAAMI minimum chamber. If it's bigger than this, if a cartridge doesn't fit in here, then it probably won't fit in a SAAMI minimum chamber. It may fit in your firearm. You got to check. All right. So if you're thinking about purchasing a set of gauges for a particular caliber or for all your calibers, if what you want is a gauge that will test your completed cartridge, don't go buy an L.E. Wilson case length gauge. That's not going to do it for you. Okay. You want a cartridge gauge. And there are other companies, right, besides Lyman and L.E. Wilson. There's other outfits out there that make cartridge gauges for you. So I hope you got something out of that. If you have questions or comments, if you use these gauges, something like that, how many of you use those? What brand do you use? Let me know in the comments. All right. Again, I hope you got something out of all of that. But from the Viejo Bench for now, that's all she wrote.